The US Vice President saying what Europeans want to hear, but up in Sweden, they can't believe their ears. The US President speaks and the truth goes missing. Tonight, a Trump twist on the Stockholm Syndrome. I'm Brent Goff in Berlin. This is The Day.
And so today it is my privilege on behalf of President Trump.
Look at Brexit. Look at Brexit.
To express the strong commitment of the United States to continued cooperation and partnership with the European Union.
People want to take back control of their countries.
And let me assure you, the United States is committed to continuing.
But many of the countries in NATO, many of the countries that we protect, many of these countries are very rich countries.
And expanding our collaboration on the collective security of all of our peoples.
They're not paying their bills. They're not paying their bills.
After such a positive declaration, both Europeans and Americans must simply practice what they preach.
Also coming up tonight, where the wild things are not in the fight against the Islamist Boko Haram. A zoo in Nigeria has become a place where fears are tamed. We're going to take you there in about 15 minutes. All right, we begin the day with Pence's pledges. The U.S. Vice President Mike Pence is in Europe, and today he delivered one pledge of loyalty and support after another. In Brussels, headquarters of the European Union and NATO, Pence delivered messages which for decades have been considered a given, but now have become part of a give and take, part of the Trump transaction. Pence repeated America's commitment to its partner, the European Union, without once mentioning that his boss has said that the EU is headed for a big breakup, and rightly so. At NATO headquarters, Pence continued with his charm offensive, but he also reminded members that this is a club and that they're overdue on their dues. Our coverage begins tonight with this report, a day that almost felt like a therapy session.
Pence, get out of our pen!
It was not a particularly warm welcome for the US Vice President today in Brussels. But unlike the protesters camped outside the EU Council building, EU leaders had long been looking forward to Mike Pence's visit.
Dear friends, let me first of all thank you for this meeting. We all truly needed it.
After all, there was much to discuss during Pence's first official visit to the European Union capital, with EU Foreign Policy Chief Federica Mogherini, with Commission President Jean-Claude Juncker, with NATO Secretary General Jens Stoltenberg, and with EU Council President Donald Tusk. In hours-long meetings, Pence tried to reassure the Europeans about his boss's stance toward the bloc.
Today it is my privilege on behalf of President Trump to express the strong commitment of the United States to continued cooperation and partnership with the European Union. Whatever our differences, our two continents share the same heritage, the same values, and above all, the same purpose.
That's a major change of tone. Donald Trump welcomed the UK's Brexit vote and has at times seemed to be lobbying for the breakup of the EU. Protesters in Brussels criticized that, as well as the Trump administration's Muslim travel ban and its treatment of minorities.
No, he's not an American problem. They're importing American problems into our society, and I completely disagree with the way they are handling it. I also disagree with the way they're setting different people up against each other, where we should be collaborating and working together.
We don't want to live in a world that's run by people who have these values, right? So we believe in freedom of speech and equality and equal rights for all, and that's not what the Trump administration supports.
While Pence's visit is unlikely to dispel the concerns of many EU leaders, officials in Brussels say they are encouraged by his statements. But they will be watching closely to see how far Donald Trump's actions match his deputy's words.
All right, we want to bring in our Brussels bureau chief now, Max Hoffman. He's been on the story for us all day. Good evening to you, Max. Let's do a little before and after the Pence pledges today. Would you say that NATO and European Union leaders, do they feel better tonight compared to the way they felt this morning?
We really lack the data to answer that question, Brent, to know how they felt this morning and after, but I'll have a wild guess here. They feel like they ate too much Belgian chocolate because, they ate a lot of that stuff with all the soothing comments by Pence. And then when they ate it all up, they got the funny feeling that they talked to the wrong person, and they still don't know what Donald Trump, the U.S. president, really wants.
Last weekend, the U.S. president, again, held Brexit as this example of people taking back control of their lives and taking control of their governments again. Today, Vice President Pence said that America is basically the European Union's best friend. Did you almost feel, as a reporter, like, you were suffering from whiplash trying to keep up with which version to believe?
We're getting used to it because he's not the first to do that. We had James Mattis, the U.S. Secretary of Defense, here last week, and this was not Pence's first stop. As you know, he was at the Munich Security Conference as well. So we've seen these parallel universes. His ministers say one thing, and it almost feels like any administration that was here in the last decades, giving their reassurances, pledging their commitment, and at the same time, the U.S. president tweets something or says something, for example, at a rally in Florida, where he invents terrorist attacks in Sweden and criticizes NATO. So that's the dilemma we are in, and that's the dilemma that makes European leaders be very skeptical of what Pence said. Even if they believe him, that he believes it, they still don't trust that this is really going to happen. So I think more and more European leaders are ready to judge the Trump administration solely by its actions, not by its words. And also we've been hearing from many leaders in the last weeks that they are at least going to try to take European matters in their own hands and create their own destiny, not be as reliant on the U.S. as they have been in the past.
I was talking earlier today with some people who had just gotten back from the Munich Security Conference, and they kept saying over and over again, where was Trump? Where was the U.S. president? Is there the feeling there in Brussels also that maybe the U.S. president and not the vice president should have been the one speaking to the European Union today?
I looked up when both Obama and George W. Bush came to Europe for the first time in their times, in their administrations, and Obama came for the first time end of March 2009. George W. came even later than that, I believe in June of his first year. So Donald Trump, by any measurement, isn't too late or anything, but he's just created such a whirlwind that there's more questions that need to be answered. And Donald Tusk, the European Donald in this case, said as much. He said this was very necessary to talk because we've been asking ourselves so many questions. It's sort of like a turbo. And that's why maybe Europeans feel the urge to personally talk to Donald Trump earlier than they might have felt the urge to talk to Barack Obama or even George W. Bush.
Yeah, I think that's a very good point. What about the U.S. and NATO? Let's take a listen to what Pence said about what, in his opinion, NATO is fighting against today. Take a listen.
I just want to assure the people of Brussels and all the people of Europe that your pain is our pain, your loss is our loss. And it's precisely why the President believes it's essential that NATO continue on this new path of evolving and expanding its mission to be more effective in counterterrorism.
So counterterrorism, Max, I mean, is that what you're hearing in Brussels? Is NATO there to fight Islamist terrorism? And what about Russian aggression?
Well, the only Article 5 collective defense incident we've ever had with NATO was because of Islamist terrorism, 9/11, 2001. But of course, NATO wasn't necessarily created for that. It was created as a defensive alliance. But of course, you can always agree on fighting terrorism. That's something that Trump promised during his campaign, and all the other NATO members are willing to oblige here. Russia is a much more complicated question, and there was a twofold message coming from Mike Pence when he was here. First of all, he said we need to hold Russia accountable for its actions in Ukraine. He wants to boost U.S. presence in Eastern Europe because of that. He might want to uphold sanctions. We don't know. He didn't directly talk about that. There was much speculation that maybe with the Trump administration, they would stop prolonging the sanctions. And the second part of that message was that they were going to find new common ground, the U.S. that is, with Russia. So it's hard to say what exactly they're planning here.
And Max, you know, based on your experience, and I'll ask you to speculate a little bit here, who was Pence speaking for today? Was he speaking for the U.S. president?
At times it really did feel like it, Brent, because when he said how grateful he was, how privileged he was, and I quote here, "My great privilege to serve as the vice president, and grateful about the relationship that I have with the president of the U.S." It almost felt like he talked directly to the U.S. President Donald Trump here. At times when he talked tough, for example, asking all the other European nations to spend more on defense, it seemed like he talked to the American public, saying things like, well, whoever doesn't have a plan yet to increase their defense spending, get a plan, you know, something you could say, I don't know, in a bar on a Saturday night. And then, but most of the time, I'd say 90% he was talking to the Europeans, and that was, you know, the Belgian chocolate part, the soothing, the commitment, all that.
Yeah. All right. It's not bad to end a day with Belgian chocolates, that's for sure. All right. Our Brussels Bureau Chief, Max Hoffman, on the story for us tonight. Max, thank you very much.